Hi, I'm Hari from Enforcefx. I'm a freelance photographer, filmmaker, and drone operator based in Sydney, Australia. And in this video, I'm going to share with you my secrets on how to edit HDR photography for real estate.
3, 2, 1.
So I'd just like to start by saying that I predominantly don't really shoot much HDR in general, and I would never really use this for interiors unless it's a very large space. And saying that, there's a lot of times outside when you can't use flash or those type of things where your flashes aren't powerful enough. So HDR photography, especially for real estate, is kind of your only option to really get the dynamic range that you need sometimes. What I usually do, let's say the scene is fairly static, we've got a good amount of light, I'll set up the camera on a tripod, I'll put it up to f11, ISO 100, whatever shutter speed to get your base exposure so the camera meter is just sitting at the correct exposure. And then from there, I'll set the camera on a timer, so basically it will take each photo without me having to touch the camera. And from that point, I will have made sure I bracketed 5 shots at 2 f-stops apart. I found once I learned this little secret, it covered a really wide dynamic range of information, and then I was getting the results, or when you put the photos into HDR software, it actually does what it's meant to do. But in this tutorial, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper and show how to fix some common problems, particularly ghosting. I found most HDR software doesn't actually fix ghosting. That's when the layers don't line up perfectly. And I find that their inbuilt features for ghosting generally make the photos worse. So we'll touch on that. And also I find that some HDR photos can actually increase the amount of detail in certain areas. Let's say you have like a dirty driveway or dirty concrete. I just find that it really accentuates the detail in areas that I don't like. So I'm going to show you a few techniques on how we can blend original photos back over the top of our HDR photos to make them look a little bit more natural. With that said, let's get started and blend some HDR photos.
3, 2, 1.
Alright, so here we are in Lightroom, and I've got 5 bracketed images. They were all taken at 2 f-stops apart, and what I'm going to do is just select all of them, and reset them so there's no settings done to them yet. I'm going to put a base preset on it, but what I'm going to do is get rid of these values without tonal adjustments. So just bring that back to default. But I like this preset because it's done some sharpening and got rid of my chromatic aberrations. Okay, so then we're going to take it into Aurora, HDR. You can use whatever HDR software you like, but I'm going to use Aurora. And for this tutorial, just about any HDR software will work. So click OK, bring in with the Lightroom adjustments. So this pot plant just there, as you can see, actually moved a little bit with the wind, and we're going to get a bit of ghosting problems with this particular example. So what I'm going to do to start with, I'm going to turn on ghosting. And this is an inbuilt feature with Aurora. Cool, alright, it's done not a too bad job. Typical looking HDR photo. But if we zoom in to 100%, or maybe then a little bit further, you can see here where we have the ghosting problem, where the layers didn't line up. You've got this weird grey halo effect on the outside of our pot plant, and that really just ruins the image, and it's not really something that I think's usable or workable. I mean, you could do a sky replacement, repair it, but you know, it's grey, it's blue, it's still going to be hard to make a selection. So I'm going to cancel this. Now we're just back to the start. I'm going to go through and do it again. Cool. Alright, so once again, we're going to leave ghost reduction off. And I'm not going to use auto alignment because these photos were taken on a tripod. I used a timer, so the camera didn't move at all while we took the photos. So I don't think we really need that. So we'll click Create HDR. Cool. And I think it's done a good job. I mean, we've got detail in the sky now. with, you know, the whole image is correctly blended together. We just still have the ghosting problem, as you can see here. So what I'm gonna do is just bring it back to Lightroom. And like, I know that most people may not even bother to fix this in the HDR photos for real estate. Like I totally get it, but let's say this was a more high-end job, or you know, the client was complaining about it, or the ghosting was that bad, it just is really ruining the image. This is going to give you a technique to combat this situation. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the TIFF files again, the ones that it created, but I'm still going to leave the HDR one. So let's delete them too. Cool. All right, so I'm going to make that red so it's easy for me to find. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into the compare view. And what I'm doing is I'm looking for something around this area of the photo. I want to find something on this side of a single raw image that's going to help us get rid of this ghosting problem. So I know from previous attempts on this, getting ready for this tutorial, that it was this image here that I was going to use. So I'm going to make that green, so 8 on the keyboard. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back the highlights, bring up the shadows, and bring up the exposure. And what I'm really trying to do is get this photo to be a similar brightness to this ghosting area. You can see here it's looking pretty good, it's pretty close. So now what we'll do is I'm going to open them both in layers in Photoshop. Cool. So there's our HDR photo. On top of is so that's our single raw photo on top, and then we've got our HDR blend down the bottom. I'm going to create a mask on this one, and I'm going to hold down Alt at the same time. So you can see it's put on a mask and it's made it black, so now it's hiding that layer. I'm going to zoom into 100% so I really see what's going on here. Press B on the brush. I've got 8% flow, and we've got our white color on the brush. I'm just going to start painting this area in. So now you can see that the colors are somewhat different around this area a little bit, so we could just maybe press B again and just sort of brush it in, feather it in a little bit more so it's sort of less noticeable, harder to sort of detect that blend. And then once again here, I think this pot plant ever so slightly had a bit of ghosting going on. It's very minimal, but you can see it. You may not want to bother doing this for every single one of your photos, but just the times where you feel like you need it, this is a great technique to help repair ghosting problems with HDR. Let's bring that in. Okay, I hope I've got all the areas. Let's say we're happy with that. I think maybe even we could just brush in this area just a little bit, so now the brickwork looks sort of more uniformed. Cool, and I think that's looking pretty good. So now we could select both layers, press Ctrl E, press Ctrl S to save it. And there you go, we've got a HDR photo where we've fixed the ghosting problems. So also I think it's worth noting too, a HDR photo and a raw image. So I'll just go back to this raw image. This is the image that we used to get rid of the ghosting. And if we go to the develop settings, you can see I maxed out the highlights, I brought up the shadows, and I had to bring it up to 3 f-stops. And if we zoom in to say even 200%, you can really see that we're starting to get a lot of noise here. And this is why you want to avoid delivering photos like this to the client. I'm not saying that you can't do it, I'm just saying that this is what happens. You end up reducing image quality and you get a lot of noise. If we go back to our HDR photo that we edited, So I'll go backwards and forwards. That's the noise that you got in the single raw photo. And then you can see how smooth and no noise there is in there, and it's maintained quality. Obviously, where I did paint in the areas from this image, you will get the noise. It's not a perfect technique, but it really is not going to be that noticeable. I'd sort of like to say too that it's not very often that I actually even shoot HDR photos. It's just in situations where I feel like my flashes or my lights aren't powerful enough to really light the scene, basically. So in those circumstances, I will sort of go to HDR photography and still try to get good results. So I would say that these type of photos that I'm showing you today make up 5%, or even maybe 1 or 2 or 3% of my whole business. But it's just something that I've developed myself over the years, and HDR photography really, I could never really get good results with it, and I'd always go away from it. But these techniques have really brought me back to it, and I felt like I've been able to get half decent results in most situations, as long as they're not too backlit. And I don't really do this type of stuff for interiors. I'm always doing flambient for interiors. But with that said, let's get this going. So in this example, there wasn't really any ghosting issues that I noticed anyway. But I felt like around the barbecue area, once I did the HDR blends, the image just became very unnatural. I just find that sometimes some parts of the images end up getting very saturated, or it really accentuates the detail in the floor, and dirty floors can look even more dirty than they really are and stuff like that. So for this example, what we're going to do is we're just going to blend it, bring it back into Lightroom, and then we're going to find another single raw file that's a similar brightness to this one. I'm not going to do anything in Aurora. All I want to do is get the blend done. It's done a pretty good job. I really feel like this has done a pretty good job. Straight out of Aurora. There is a bit of a ghosting issue there, but I probably wouldn't fix that. It's not big enough. But if it was something that bothered me, I would go through like in the last example and fix that. But I sort of just see here around the barbecue, it looks very dark. The colors look different to what it is in real life. So I'm just going to go to library. What we're going to do is we're going to make this one 6. And we're going to get rid of all the TIFF files, just because they can become a bit confusing. So now we've got our 5 photos. Let's go to the compare view again. So we've got our TIFF there. I'm going to select the candidate. I'm looking for an area that looks to be a similar brightness in the foreground, particularly around that barbecue area that's similar to there. So let's zoom in and we can actually compare to see what they look like with the difference. In this example, I don't think it really looks that bad. I'm really fixing nothing there's not really anything that really needs fixing too bad. But I'm just going to show you for the sake of, what you can do or how you could fix these type of problems. So let's just bring this layer down. It's maybe a little bit too bright. Something like that. Bring in the 2 layers. Because the thing is, right, I feel like this layer is pretty good. Well, I mean, in these areas and stuff like that, it's pretty good. It's not too bad on the ceiling. But obviously around here, it's not that good. It's blown out and we've got bad dynamic range. But generally the foreground looks pretty good in my opinion. There's really nothing too wrong with it. So we can then bring both layers in, bring them into Photoshop. Cool. So that's our HDR one at the bottom. That's our single raw image at the top. What I'm going to do is create a mask on it and make it a 50% gray. So I've got an action that does that. So it created a mask and puts it 50% gray. So all that does is it essentially brings the opacity down to 50%. I like doing any blending like that because now I just get my brush on a 8% flow or somewhere around there. I bring in my foreground color to be black and I can just paint over the areas where I don't want that layer to be. I'm just going to even bring it up to 16 so we don't have to paint so much on the sky area and that type of thing. Cool. And so by starting with this gray area, it just helps me blend. There's less work to do. I feel like it's a good starting point. So there we go. We've got our background there, and then I'll press X on the keyboard. We'll bring our foreground color to white, and I can just start painting in over this area that I felt looked a little bit unnatural. But usually I find it's the flaws and things like that just start to really just look, you know, not how a normal photo looks. And either we can make the roof a bit brighter, something like that. And then, very good. I'll select both layers. Let's look at a before and after. You can see here it's blown out the highlight on the floor. It's kind of ruined our HDR effect a little bit. So I will just paint that area in so we still get it. We want to be careful because that's going to create that dark bit around, but we can just sort of feather that in so it's not too noticeable. Or even feather it out, whatever looks better. And there you go. There you've got a HDR photo that's going to look as natural as possible in my opinion. I've got a saturation brush preset, so I put that on. Basically that made that layer more saturated. I hit it with a layer mask, and now I'm just going to paint in a bit of saturation over the blue sky and those type of things. And there we go. So we've created a HDR photo. We've got the dynamic range we wanted, and I've managed to make it look a little bit more natural in those situations where they look a bit muddy or just look a little bit dirty. So there we go.
3, 2, 1.
And there we have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this HDR tutorial. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. I'm Hari from Enforcefx. Thanks for watching.